Technology is a tremendous liberator. It blows up power structures. Women are naturally drawn to electronic music. You didn't have to be accepted by any of the male-dominated resources. You could make something with electronics and you can present music directly to your audience. And that gives you tremendous freedom.
Hello and welcome along to BFI at Home, Women with a Movie Camera Q&A. My name's Edith Bowman and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you the fabulous director Lisa Rovener to talk about her brilliant new film, Sisters With Transistors. Lisa, it's an absolute pleasure to get the chance to talk to you about this incredible film that I just feel these are women that I knew fleeting things about, and names that are a few names that I knew, some names I had no idea, but stories that we needed to hear of their creative pioneering journey. Where did the idea for Sisters with Transistors come from, about telling this remarkable journey of women in music, really?
I think it was just discovering that there was a whole lineage of women working in electronic music that I had, again, similar to you. I had these I heard these names, I had heard of certain albums. I knew one Eliane Radigue album, but I had no idea who she was, what her story was. And so, yeah, it was discovering kind of a timeline of all of these women and realizing that there were so many. And then that kind of piqued my interest. And then the more I looked into them and the more I listened to their sound and the more, I guess, the moment I realized that this was the sound of a kind of liberation was a thing that really grabbed me. And then, of course, seeing them in photos and a few little things I could find online made me think, oh my gosh, this is, I wanted to know more and I wanted to share what I was discovering.
Was there a jumping off point in terms of research, knowing who you wanted to feature? And I imagine it, well, I don't know, tell me, when you started that research process of what it unveiled as well, in terms of the riches of all these incredible women.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I want to say is that obviously this is a history of women in electronic music. This is not the entire history of women in electronic music. This is just a sample of what has of things to come. I think we will continue to uncover more and more women working in electronic music, hopefully. But yeah, the film was really led by the archive I could find.
Listening is the basis of creativity and culture, and how a community of people listen is what creates their culture.
What was your jumping off point? Where did you start with that research?
Yeah, I guess the jumping off point was kind of discovering this article that was kind of talking about all these women, and then really I just started looking into it. And then when I reached out and got a positive response from Laurie and Suzanne and Eliane, then I was like, okay, well, then now I've got to do it. Now I've got to go and meet them. Now I've got to go interview them and discover what archive I could find. Because there were a few things on the internet, but then the reality is that it took 4 years to find all of that stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
I guess, you mentioned it as well about this part of the story. This is not kind of the definitive list. And it's also, as a documentary filmmaker, knowing where to stop, knowing what your narrative is, and knowing the journey and the arc and the characters that you want to include within this story. Was that easy for you to kind of come up with?
No, it was very difficult. No, generally, in a documentary, generally you have one person, you tell the story of one person. And it was actually very difficult to navigate and to figure out how best to tell this big story while making sure that each woman had, time and space, and that you really get a sense of who each of them is. So no, it was incredibly difficult. And then of course it was difficult as well because I wanted to make sure that the form of the film really reflected the radical nature of the subject. So it wasn't just about doing a kind of typical standard documentary with a big clear beginning, middle, and end. I really wanted the stories to weave. And yes, it generally follows a chronological arc. But I wanted to kind of break with that a little bit. And so it jumps around a little bit. But yeah, the form really was, it was tricky to find. Like I knew I didn't want talking heads. I knew that I wanted you know, even just the way that, even their narration, the way we wrote it, I didn't want it to be just facts. I wanted it to be open. I wanted the narrator to not be all knowing, because
Yeah.
that I think is like the reason that so many people get written out of history, is because of these all knowing narrators that we just assume that they're truth tellers, but they also have agendas, and so yeah, so I really wanted, in the writing of the film, we tried to challenge those, what I see of as very limiting storytelling devices.
Was that something that was a constant moving piece then? Because I imagine whilst you were in the edit, in terms of the, finalizing the structure of it, the narrative has got to, like you say, it's not just there to fulfill one thing. It's there to inform, to guide. I find it almost kind of, it encourages you to come along on the journey really as well, which I love. And a lot of that's down to Laurie's voice and just her kind of warmth, I think, as well. But was it a constant moving piece, that script for the narration element of it?
Yeah, the script for the narration really came at the end, but definitely the edit it wasn't something that I wrote and then we edited. It was something that we were constantly playing around with. And because of the way that this film was funded, which is, we got a bit of money at the beginning and then really struggled to find the rest of the funding, it was stop and start with the edit. And we edited with many different editors because, of course, the moment that we had a bit of money to go back into the edit room, that editor was no longer available. And so we had to find somebody else. And it's interesting because, you think that you just want to work with one editor on a project. But it was actually amazing to work with 3 main editors because each of them brought their own unique perspective. And it was also great to have like a fresh set of eyes on the material, every.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a real challenge to make it work.
I find it wonderful as well that, as well as there being this really wonderful narrative of discovery, of an introduction to, so this will be such, this will be an introduction for so many people to the world of all these brilliant females in the world of electronic music. But there's also, like you say, there's another narrative running along there as well, in terms of not just about the kind of pioneer element, but the kind of the struggles within a kind of very male dominated world being taken seriously. I think there's a great bit where Suzanne talks about being hard to do the music for the incredible shrinking woman, and then it was such a big thing because female composers were never attached to films in this way and stuff. And there's all these brilliant kind of points that come out of the narrative that are obviously part of their journey, but they also have a slightly bigger message in a way. Was that deliberate, or was that things that you kind of came across along the way through the discussions, through the archives that you discovered as well?
Yeah, it was I wouldn't say it's necessarily deliberate, but it was definitely a big part of the story. And I studied political science, so for me, that kind of what I'm interested in doing with film is to talk about politics, but in an engaging and disarming way. And yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the things that really drew me to the story, was how this new technology enabled these women to be composers, to get their compositions out to audiences. Because before, this technology, was really practically impossible for women writing notes on a piece of paper to get that composition out to audiences.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was definitely very interested in the bigger picture and pulling that out of the stories, but not through manipulation, just through conversations that I had and the archive that I found. And
the archive footage is amazing. Was it easy to find? Was it, or was that kind of a bit of a, you talk about it taking 4 years, was that a bit of a journey to discover? It's so interesting as well, hearing these women being interviewed by these kind of, stiff white men in suits, about their creativity and their passion and the science and all this. It's so stereotypical, particularly of those times, sort of way back sort of thing. But was that easy to access a lot of that archive, or
no?
How did you access it?
It was hell. Originally, when I first started working on the project, we kind of hired an archivist, and we thought, okay, let's see what we can find. And it was she came back with nothing basically. And it was just, I realized at that moment that there was never going to be the right kind of budget to pay for somebody to do the research that it would take. So I kind of took on the challenge, and yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it's kind of like doing private detective work, you know, it's kind of tracing people's lives. Where were you there? Where were you there? Looking at CVs, looking at concerts, like finding ephemera, and then reaching out to old lovers. And I mean, some of the archive was obviously easier to source, like the BBC, and for Delia and Daphne, it was quite more straightforward.
Yeah.
But and then Laurie and Suzanne both have amazing archives, so that was more straightforward as well. But some of it was very difficult, and also what was really important to me was to find interviews, because I really wanted these women to tell their own stories. Again, to move away from that typical documentary kind of trope where you have like somebody famous saying, oh, this is why this person is great.
To me, it's listening to this singing of a soul. Now, isn't that a lovely song? Singing of a soul.
I guess you had that you know, that wonderful thing of having access to Suzanne and Laurie, for example, to really give you their experience, and also, I guess, talk about the female pioneers that inspired them or encouraged them as well when they were, you know, at the start of their careers. Was that something that you kind of enjoyed speaking to them about?
Definitely. I mean, I think that they didn't, you know, it's really interesting because obviously one of the things that comes out in the film is just how important it is to have these role models, these, you know, these women to look up to. And what's so extraordinary about their paths is that they didn't have other women. They didn't know about each other. You know, I was just talking to Suzanne, and she, you know, she had heard of Daphne maybe, you know, 5 years ago, but didn't have any sense of what she had done or who she was. So yeah, it's really remarkable to think that these women just did what they did without role models. And really paved the way, obviously, for this younger generation. And what I hope is that the film will inspire more and more people to play around and to do things with electronics, but also just to be creative in your own way and do carve your own path. I think that's the main story for me, is just as a young woman, also just find your own way. You know, I feel kind of on the margins in so many ways in terms of how I'm come to film and all of that stuff. And it was just so inspiring to have them as role models for my own attempts in creativity.
Yeah. Why did you want to tell this story?
Oh, it was just so rich. These were women with agency. They were independent. They were persistent. They were, you know, extraordinary artists. I've always been very interested in the avant-garde, in music, in art, in also the parallel between this early experimental music and the early experimental films, which I'm very moved and inspired by. And yeah, I mean, why wouldn't I want to tell the story? It's just such an extraordinary part of history. And I just felt so inspired, and I was just, I think that's one of the things that I hope to do with my films is inspire.
Can we talk a little bit about Laurie Anderson and working with her, and how you approached her, and what the ask was of her, really, and how she came to narrate it?
Yeah, so I've known about Laurie's been a big influence, but since I was a kid, since Superman, so quite a long time ago. So when I was thinking about her, I was wondering whether she should be, you know, a character in the film, but then my tagline was always, you know, unsung. In electronic music, and it just didn't feel quite the same. And obviously she's big in a certain world, and not in another world, but she'd had this, she'd had a lot more exposure than some of these other women. So there came a point where I thought, okay, well, actually what I would really love from her is for her to narrate it. And originally I just kind of reached out to her about the project, just through an email.
Great.
And she just immediately kind of responded to it. I guess, and then, yeah, we had lunch. I went to her studio and I got to kind of see how she lives and works. Like, she's just got this incredible team of people, and they have this communal lunch. And it was really, again, like, this is kind of what I want too in my life. You know, I want to have an amazing team and for us to cook lunch together and have people come in and talk to us about their projects. And then yeah, I guess I asked her to narrate the film much like towards the end of the film, when I had the rough cut and when I could show her kind of what I was hoping for. And then I worked on the voiceover with Sophia Almeria, who's a filmmaker and writer and artist. And it was clear to us that it needed to be, we wrote for her. We wrote the voiceover with her in mind.
Yeah.
And I think if the ask had been, you know, longer or different in terms of the writing, I don't know if she would have said yes. But it was very fluid and very easy. And she's just, yeah, a very open, curious, I mean, lovely person. And so, yeah, I just kind of sent her the script, and then she just sent it. It was like, it was very easy. I think that's the key for these kind of things, to make these things happen, is just very easy and simple.
I loved all the archive footage that you had of these women playing, you know, with these machines and these, and I loved as well kind of seeing how inventive they were with their creativity, you know, and how much they got out of it personally as well, and the fight against the expectation, particularly with music, and that music has to be performed and played on or in a certain way. And I love kind of the encouragement and the inspiration that they found within their own ability to, like you say, to find their own path, to do things their way. I think so many young creative women will get so much from this film on that side of it. But to watch them, you know, these huge, they look like those old school, a lot of them look like the old school telephone exchanges almost, in a way. But just seeing, I loved watching that.
To make them of value for a musical piece, we have to shape them and mold them. We can build up any sound we can possibly imagine.
Well, you talked about the editing process there and working with different editors. And I getting lost in it as a film fan and a music fan, and hearing these stories, knowing kind of how much time to give each person, each story, how to color and flavor that with archives, but also, you know, even kind of images of sound waves and things like that you've done in terms of the aesthetic of the film as well. Was that fun to play with? Definitely.
It was really crucial to me that we give like the music itself a lot of space. Yeah. And that's why we really, you know, originally I'd hoped that maybe we'd get like a BBC commission and I'd do a TV doc about the subjects. I felt like it was so right for British audiences, and that didn't work out. But in the end, it was kind of a blessing in disguise, because of course, when you do a 60-minute or a 52-minute, you don't have the time and space to like have abstract visuals over, you know, music. Yeah. So it was so fun to play with. This music lends itself so well to being creative with the edit. And yeah, I mean, in terms of figuring out how, it was just, that was just the priority for me. It's like, let's not have too many voices when we listen to the music. Let's actually have time to listen. Yeah. And while we're in that listening period, let's have fun with the visuals and the edit.
The sense of wonder and awe, the beauty coming from the circuits. I mean, we would just sit back and let them take over.
I think it's really great as well, because I can see like the inspiration, for example, that someone like Mika Levy, you can hear where she's got her inspiration from hearing some of the journeys of these women. And obviously she's someone who's incredibly successful, you know, and you know, Oscar nominated and the likes, and celebrated for her wonderful work. And And I think that what's great about this as well, there's a timelessness to what they're creating. You know, I think that that's what makes it really stand out as a musical genre, or however you want to describe it. But there's a unique timelessness to what they're creating, I think. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the ideas, you know, that that this music was expressing, you know, this idea of listening to sound and rethinking what is music, all those things I think are still to this day very, very relevant. And it's interesting about Mika Levy because I had actually asked her to do an original score for the film, and she like very smartly said, you know what, I think the music of the women is there's just no room, like let's just let that be.
Yeah.
It was such a, obviously it was like a bit of a blow because I was like, oh, you know, are you sure? Like, I'm sure we can find a way.
Yeah.
But in the end, she was so right. And I'm so pleased that she, you know, that she had the respect to let, you know, this, and it's interesting, this ego thing, you know, with women. And I feel like so much of this music is ego-less in a way. And it's really much more about listening and care for sounds and for the world around. I think that's one of the things that I really hope people walk away with is like a curiosity to stories that have not been heard, but also this like new ability to listen inclusively and deeply and to appreciate the sound world around you. And I think what Pauline Oliveros says about like, it wasn't so much about what she was doing with sounds, it was about what the sounds were doing to her. And that's kind of what I feel with this film. I'm like, wow, you know, these sounds, what have they done? You know, how are they making me feel? And I hope that they make other people feel curious and hopeful and inspired.
And I think that that's the wonderful thing that it really encourages, is that kind of unique interpretation, and that what you take away from a piece of music that features in the film or from one of these incredible artists is very different to what there's a unique interpretation for everybody. Everyone has a different emotional response to it. Everybody can see and feel different things with it. That's kind of what I love about it. And I love that there's no time stamp on it as well, in terms of it doesn't have to be a certain length.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because one of the things that came up, like in one of the discussions, and you know, you do lots of interviews that don't make the film, and it was, you know, I hope to like publish a book with all of the interviews because there's so many brilliant things that were said that just didn't fit in the narrative and like didn't make sense. But it's interesting because you know, Eliane Radigue, she really struggled to, as she talks about in the interview in English, where she says, you know, people in Paris, they don't think of my music, they don't like it, they don't think of it as music.
Yeah.
And one of the things that came up was that, you know, you couldn't fit her music on a record. And so it wasn't commercialized. And so if it wasn't able to be commercialized, could it be considered by the establishment as music? And it's very interesting. That idea that it struggled to fit into into what we consider as music, also because it wasn't you weren't able to commercialize it in the same way.
It'd be lovely now if that was kind of corrected, wouldn't it, in terms of the digital age and how time has no really relevance really when it comes to streaming and being able to listen to music on you know, Spotify or whatever it is that you listen to it on, those kind of services, because it doesn't have the restraints of the length of a piece of vinyl or a CD, that it can exist now. It can be out there. It can have a commercial opportunity for people around the world to experience and listen to it.
Yeah. You just need time.
Hopefully this film will do this. That's what we need. We need the back catalogues of them all put up there and made available for everyone to enjoy and experience. Because I guess that's a really interesting thing, because the only opportunity people would have to, well, what would have been the only opportunity for people to hear this if it was played live, if it was played as an installation or part of a performance? That was the only way that some of it would have been able to have been experienced.
Yeah, in its entirety, yes.
Wow.
But even some of the stuff that was obviously made for the BBC, like some of it is just so beautiful. It's really, it served its purpose to accompany, television and radio, but just as
Yeah.
sound, it was really fun to dig into all of that.
It is almost kind of like I think for a lot of people who, maybe this isn't their thing, and they have a slight kind of apprehension about electronic music to this extent, but when you talk about something as commercial as the Doctor Who theme tune, and you go, this woman wrote it and made it, and here is an amazing menu of other brilliant creative pieces and people that have done something in that world. It's kind of almost given them that kind of mainstream door to enter, and then taking them into this fantastic and fulfilling world.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so wild to think that the Doctor Who theme, that took 40 days. This is the kind of dedication that these people were putting into creating these sounds. It's remarkable. But yeah, I mean,
and I love. Go on, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, please, you.
No, you.
It was Delia, wasn't it, who was painting the
Daphne.
Was it Daphne? Daphne was painting the almost like as a visual of what she wanted the music to look like, and then feeding it. That blew my mind. That was so incredible.
Yeah, just creating a new language. I think that's the thing that she was, interested in obviously, her ability to imagine a new way of creating music. I mean, it's just it's mind-blowing.
Yeah. I've got my 12-year-old son who is having piano lessons, but with a wonderful teacher who isn't following the kind of traditional format of learn your scales and here's this kind of thing. What he does is he encourages Rudy to compose around things that he's into. So he helps him find the tones and things. So he's really into manga, and so he's encouraging him to compose pieces of music that fit within this world that he's inspired by. And it's so fantastic to watch, of moving away from the expected nature of learning how to play or create music, and it all be about emotion, and it all be about through about that channeling that creativity and that emotion through yourself, however that may be, through your fingers or through plugging things in. It's just, I think it should be highly encouraged, and I think your film absolutely shows the beauty of that world.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I got a theremin after discovering Clara Rockmore, and I interviewed this brilliant theremin player and composer and educator, Dorit Chrysler, and she does these theremin classes, which if you ever come across this, I definitely recommend everybody should have a theremin class with Dorit. But what I love about it is that, I mean, obviously Clara Rockmore is playing specific notes and is very, very aware and able to perform, classical compositions with the theremin, but just the instrument itself is just so incredible, because you're literally just sculpting the air and creating sound with your body, and it's just, I love that about electronic music, is that you don't, obviously a lot of the women in the film did have a musical and mathematical background, but with electronics, I think you can be somebody who didn't study music as a kid and still create incredible sounds.
Yeah, I love the idea of you doing a book about, with all the other interviews that didn't make the cut. Because I imagine, how many hours are we talking about on the various editing room floors?
Oof, I don't know. It was, we did so much editing. It's just, it was.
Is it the hardest part?
The editing?
Yeah. Of kind of having to say goodbye to things and to.
Just also not being able to fit not being able to fit everyone in. There was some there were some people that I interviewed that I really wanted them to be in the film, and there was just, at one point it just got cut, and it's very, very difficult. And then of course there are things that make sense to you emotionally, like what you're talking about, that other people are like, no, that's not important. And I'm like, no, it's really, really important. And they're like, no, it doesn't make sense. And I'm like, no, it really makes sense. So yeah, there is a lot of pain in having to let things go. And then of course with the licensing, you know, there were other things that came up where we had to just make it shorter because it's just so expensive.
Do you think that this the experience of making this film will influence your future films sonically?
Definitely. I definitely think that I'm just so much more aware of sound. And I'm a very visual person, like to begin with. And I've always been obviously into sound and recording things and into sound art, and kind of come more from like an art background, contemporary art background. But I think it's more the themes that I think really gets me going. So my next project is a political film as well. It's a fiction, so we'll see if I can get it made. but yeah, I'm definitely
get Mika Levy to do the score.
Yeah. But yeah, I would love to continue exploring like how we bring politics to the screen, because storytelling is not neutral, and we really need to recognize that and be more aware. And I just think there's so much ability, there's so much. I just think as storytellers, we need to play a more active role in the world around us. And I just think that film is an incredible way to inspire change, and whether that be like through a documentary like this, inspiring younger women to create, or, you know, just inspiring people to think about the stories that have been left out and how we can all do better. Yeah. Myself included, you know, I'm not exempt from leaving people out of stories. It's just,
I also think as well that it draws attention to the lack of female composers that are given the opportunities. I think it's another, you know, it's touched on a couple of times within the film, but I still think that it's something that needs to be addressed. And, you know, I know that it's with composers, it can be interesting in that there can sometimes be, you know, long-standing relationships with the directors, and that's a relationship that works. But I do think that it's something, like you say, it needs to be talked about, and it's a constant conversation that needs to be had for things to change.
Definitely. And, you know, women and people of color, and there's so many people that haven't had the right experience. And, you know, it's very similar to directing. You know, we do know of women in film now. There are, you know, female directors, but it's still, if you look at the statistics, it's embarrassing. Yeah. And it's the same, you know, again, with people of color, like how many female people, you know, it's just, it's even worse, the statistics. So yeah, we all do need to be aware and to do what we can to
absolutely
make our industries more inclusive.
Yeah. Talking about other great female directors, I noticed that you had a thanks on Baby Teeth, Shannon Murphy's film. I loved that film, and I just wondered what your involvement was on that film.
Oh, the screenwriter is a really good friend of mine, so lots of conversations and just, I guess mainly like emotional support. Yeah, Rita is an incredible screenwriter, and it's really great to see that film take off. And
so great to see Shannon get recognized with her BAFTA nomination as well. So deserving. I thought the film was really, really beautiful. I thought she did such a great job. But yeah, I saw your name pop up, so I want to know what she did on it. And also, it's nice to remind people watching this as well, to, if they haven't watched it yet, to go and watch it, because it's absolutely brilliant. What can you tell us about the new project then? This fictional political film you're making?
So I can tell you that it takes place in 1968 in rural France, and it's inspired by a true story. It's inspired by my mother.
Oh wow!
My mother passed away when I was 18, and at her funeral, I discovered that she was engaged to somebody before my dad. didn't know this about her. And the way I discovered that was because the person that she was engaged to wrote a letter to the family explaining why my mother had called off the wedding 2 weeks before. And he said that basically she had called it off because she wanted to participate in the '68 revolution. And marrying him was kind of going against, the times, basically.
Yeah.
And so it's an emancipation story. It's a story of a family kind of coming to grips with this very difficult decision that one person makes.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, it's a fiction, but it's very much influenced, or it will be very much, it's very much inspired and by images that I have of my mother, of stories, and it's kind of about. Yeah, it's about, like, we think of May '68 as what happened in Paris. We think of it as a student revolution, and we think of it as a failed revolution. But so it's kind of looking at that idea and looking at it from a rural perspective, looking at it from an individual perspective, and looking at it from the perspective of it changed women's lives, and I just want to revisit that, basically. And wow. It's really fascinating. So I'm kind of asking all my aunts, or it's mainly my aunts and uncle, to kind of remember. And so my mom was 20, and then the youngest one was 10, and so it's a lot about the way that they misunderstood their sister, and the effects that it had on the family. And I have a lot of my mom was French, and I never lived in France as a kid, but I would spend all my summers there. So I have like a very emotional attachment to that part of the world, Brittany. It's kind of like England. It's got a lot of the same, I guess maybe like Cornwall or something like that.
So have you started? Where are you with the production? Have you?
So I just finished the treatment. So I'm so happy I've got the story.
I'm sold. Sounds amazing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Hopefully we get the chance to talk about that in the future once you get it all done. Lisa, it's so great to chat to you about Sisters with Transistors. I think it's just such a, I think you've done an amazing job, not only in this wonderful film, but also just in terms of what you've done for these women and what they've done and what they've achieved. And I think a lot of people, including myself, find it absolutely inspiring in terms of that idea of, you can find your own journey, you can find your own way. Thank you so much, Lisa, for your time. Thanks to everybody for watching. Just to let you know that Sisters with Transistors is available on the BFI player, as is Baby Teeth. So go watch them both. See you soon. Take care. Thank you.